right, this is very casual. It's just
Mm-hmm.
we'll see where conversations go. But I
Okay.
mean, since we're sitting here in Indiana, I'm looking out over all that cornfield there. I would like you to tell us about your first memories of Indiana.
I think my first recollection is in Albany, which is south of Dunkirk, right by the railroad tracks there. And there was at that time they had a lot of these hand cars, and you would see the workers come down and they'd be pumping the hand car, so they could move, and sometimes then they would have a one cylinder, and we called it the tick tick, and it'd just go tick 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 tick, and they could ride along on there, and well, whenever my sister and I would hear that, we'd run over to the window and watch it, and we'd say, "Here comes the tick tick," you know, and so we enjoyed that. That's my memory goes back to there.
How old were you then?
Well, let's see. That would have been probably around. I was probably around 5, I think. I can go back when I was 4 years old, I think. But I do remember sitting out there, and I believe I've gone back to that very spot in Albany where my dad kissed my mother, and my sister and I were standing there holding hands with my mom, and my dad kissed my mom goodbye and got up in a big truck. And some friend of his was driving to Chicago, and that's how my dad probably, saved some money to just ride back to Chicago, because Raymond Meyer, his boyhood friend from Dunkirk, Indiana, promised my dad that when he got a job in Chicago, that he would call for my dad to come and join him. And they were two smart guys, I'll tell you. My dad just had a high school education, but he became an accountant, and never was a CPA, but I think he was qualified as like a CPA, and just osmosed into this accounting job with, well, at that time they called it, I believe, a time. He was record the amount of hours the people would work, and for the company, and he kept track of that, and then I guess put it on the payroll so that they could get paid, and so that's what I remember about it. We were just small. My sister and I guess it was about 1934, 35 that I can go back and remember that, and my dad climbed into that truck, and we didn't hear from him for maybe a couple of weeks, but finally he called for us, and I do remember waking up as a little boy in Chicago, looking out a hotel window. And how we got to Chicago, I guess on a train or a bus, and Dad put us up in this hotel until this apartment was ready for us to move into. And I remember moving into that apartment, and there was a cranky old lady that she might have been the landlord, I don't know, but I didn't particularly like her. and but that's what I remember about moving there to Chicago, and we lived there until about 19 1936, I think it was, 37. And Dad was promoted.
Who was he working for then?
It was called the Eddie Paper Corporation, I think. And he was, I think, a plant manager for that corrugated box company that was part of the Eddie Paper Corporation. And while we were there, I believe Eddie Paper sold out to some other company, and I can't remember the name, but eventually the Weyerhaeuser, the big timber company, bought out everybody, and my dad was a pretty valuable man, I imagine. He had to be. And he was made a plant manager there in Cedar Rapids.
So you got transferred to Cedar Rapids.
Cedar Rapids,
So you
Iowa.
weren't in Chicago for maybe...
Oh, probably to about 1936.
Okay. And then you were transferred to Cedar Rapids.
Cedar Rapids, right. And I love Cedar Rapids. It was a wonderful place. And we had, I remember the house, and my dad and I sometimes would go for a walk, and across the street was this cemetery. And we would walk through that cemetery, and you could walk through it, and then on the other side, it was almost like a small cliff. You could look down, and there was a hobo camp. And the hobos were, that's what they called them at that time. Like it was Depression was on, men were out of work, and they were cooking their meal. And they looked up at us and said, "Come on down, we'll give you some of our food here." And Dad said, "No, thank you." And but we just talked to him for a few minutes, and then we went back through the cemetery there to our house, which was on Verner Avenue there in Cedar Rapids. And we were there until I think it was about 1937, and then we, from there, my dad was made plant manager in, or assistant plant manager, maybe it was plant manager, but in Detroit, Michigan. And so I was about probably 6 or 7 years old, and we moved to Detroit, and it seems like at that time I was kind of chubby and wore glasses, and Detroit was a kind of a tough town, and I think it was called the, I'm not sure, the Clark School or something like that, but anyway, I do remember there was such a transition from the way that they would teach school in Cedar Rapids to Detroit, Michigan, and it was tough. And I was called, I wore glasses and was chubby, and they would call me four-eyed fatso and all that, you know. And one fella called me the Crisco Kid, you know, fat in the can.